presented. Thank you, Ms. Hummel. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Cook, for seconding that. I'd like to
Call the roll.
call the roll.
Yes, here. What was the question?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. I said, didn't I say yes? Aye.
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 Aye. And before we move on to item 2.0, the budget discussion, just want to remind folks that the division is sending out a robocall at 4:30, and so turn off your phones and all devices so we don't hear that robocall. And then I'm going to, I guess, toss it over to Dr. Herron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This evening we have our first of two budget workshops, and we have a lot of information to present this evening. And starting us off with an update on the budget outlook for next year, Ms. Ewan's going to take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Herron. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Herron. This afternoon, we will be presenting and discussing preliminary information related to the fiscal year 22 operating budget. As we go through the presentation, other members from the senior leadership team will be joining us and sharing information from their respective areas. If at any time you have a comment or question, please feel free to interject. This is an overview of the items we will be reviewing this afternoon. First will be some background information related to the requirements for developing the budget, and I will provide a brief overview of the budget process to date. We'll review the historical enrollment information as well as the projection for next year. We will then take a preliminary look at the revenue based on Governor Northam's budget, as well as review mandatory operating expenditure increases. We'll summarize everything that we present to you this afternoon and go over next steps. There are a couple of state code sections that apply to school divisions. The first one is Code Section 15.2-2503, Time for Preparation and Approval of Budget and Contents. This code section requires that on or before April 1st each year, we must approve a budget of need to pass on to our governing bodies, both the City of Williamsburg and James City County. So between now and April 1st, we must determine what our needs are and the level of funding that will be necessary to support those needs. The second state code section, 22.1-92, Estimate of Monies Needed for Public Schools, requires the superintendent, with the approval of the school board, to provide an estimate of the amount of money that is considered to be needed to support the public schools in the division, and that the budget must be set up by each major classification or category that has been prescribed by the Board of Education. We use our strategic plan to guide the development of the budget to ensure that the budget aligns with the goals of our strategic plan and that it supports the needs and goals of the school division, taking into consideration the input of our stakeholders. As we did last year, we will show the alignment with the goals of Elevate Beyond Excellence for the budget increases at our next budget work session on January 19th. In the October-November timeframe, we began collecting input from each school principal and each department administrator for the operating budget. At that time, they entered their request into our financial system. We then met with each department individually to discuss their request and determine their needs. In December, we began discussing and evaluating the cost center requests with the superintendent's senior leadership team to ensure that what we present to you is indicative of necessity. This process will continue throughout this month as we will share additional information with you at the next budget work session on January 19th. We are presenting the items that were determined to be necessary to the division so that we may gather your opinion as to how those needs should be prioritized into a final budget. The Local Composite Index, or LCI, is the state's measurement of each locality's ability to pay for public education. The formula takes into consideration the changes in property values and taxes, the local income and retail sales, and compares it to that for the entire state. Each locality's index is adjusted to maintain an overall statewide local share of 45% and an overall state share of 55%. Much of our funding is derived from a per pupil cost multiplied by 1 minus the composite index. So the lower the composite index results in more state funding, while a higher composite index would result in less state funding. The LCI is supposed to be an indicator of the wealth of the locality. If it goes up, the locality is deemed to have increased wealth and will be able to provide additional funding to support its programs. The LCI is updated at the start of each biennium. Since our school division serves 2 localities, we have 2 LCIs. The City of Williamsburg's is .7459, and James City County's is .5553 for the current biennium. This chart shows the local composite index from 2003 through 2022. Williamsburg has changed from a consistent .8 for several years and has gradually decreased to .7459. James City County has been more volatile and has fluctuated from .6228 in 2003, dropping to .5286 in 2009 at the beginning of the recession, and is somewhat stable around .56, with the current biennium being at .5553. Now we move into a review of enrollment information and the projection for next fiscal year, which will be used to develop our fiscal year 22 budget. Enrollment is based on our September 30th student count each year. Over the past 10 years, you can see that we've grown from 10,748 students in fiscal year 2013 to 11,448 last year before the pandemic. You'll notice for the current school year, we have a decline in enrollment of 590 students for a total enrollment of 10,858 for the current year. We do believe the current enrollment is an anomaly due to the pandemic and expect enrollment to increase once we return to more normal operating conditions. Each year, FutureThink prepares 10-year enrollment projections based on our September 30th enrollment information. These projections include a low, moderate, most likely, and high projection. For many years, we have used the low projection to develop our operating budget. As we move into the fiscal year 22 budget cycle, we are planning to develop the budget based on our current year enrollment as of September 30th. We have seen a decline in enrollment this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic and believe the most conservative approach is to budget based on the students that we currently have. I would also like to remind everyone that these enrollment numbers do not include preschool students, which total 395 each year. Moving on to revenue, this will be a first look at our estimated state revenue based on Governor Northam's introduced budget. This is all preliminary information based on the governor's budget that could change based on action by the General Assembly. This table shows a comparison of our state revenue as presented in the governor's proposed budget and compared to our fiscal year 21 adopted budget. The first area is state sales tax for education, which is both the 1% and the 1/8% portion that are appropriated for distribution to school divisions based on school-age population. As you will recall, our current fiscal year 21 budget amount reflects a 40% reduction in the estimated state projection for sales tax. At this point in the fiscal year, we are not seeing a 40% reduction, but we have only received payments for the months of July through October. For fiscal year 22, we are proposing that we budget 15% less than what the current state estimates are for sales tax, and that is what is reflected in this table. State revenue for standards of quality, or SOQ, will see a decrease of approximately $1.2 million. This is due to a decline in our ADM. Our fiscal year 21 budget is based on a total enrollment of 11,389, and our estimated fiscal year 22 budget is based on our current enrollment of 10,858. The governor's proposed budget recognizes the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on public school enrollment and provides no loss funding for school divisions. You will see this funding reflected in the incentive programs line item. Incentive programs will see an increase of approximately $2.7 million. This is primarily due to the no loss funding in the amount of $2.2 million. The governor's budget also provides funding for a 2% one-time bonus payment in fiscal year '22 by September 1st, 2021 for funded SOQ instructional and support positions. Divisions must certify that a minimum average 2% bonus or equivalent action will be provided in order to receive the funding. Our state revenue to support this bonus payment is approximately $500,000. Our categorical revenue is anticipated to decrease slightly by about $5,000. This is due to a decline in students receiving homebound services. As part of finalizing our fiscal year '21 budget, we also budgeted lottery-funded program revenues at an anticipated 40% reduction due to some uncertainty early on in the pandemic related to lottery funds. For fiscal year '22, we are proposing that we budget 15% less than what the current state estimates are for lottery funds, and that is what is reflected in this table. Projected lottery amounts are being used to fund the state's share of various programs, such as the Infrastructure and Operations Per Pupil Fund, Early Reading Intervention, K-3 Primary Class Size Reduction, and SOL Algebra Readiness. We are estimating an increase of $700,000 in this area as compared to our adopted FY21 budget. Overall, we are looking at a total increase in state funding of approximately $5.1 million, or 11% over our current fiscal year '21 budget.
Ms. Ewing,
Yes.
do we consider this to be best-case scenario, the governor's proposal?
At this time,
I think it's unlikely that it will increase. It more often decreases or stays the same as a general rule. However, one stipulation may happen. There is discussions around the 2% bonus payment. If funding is available, that may turn into a 2% raise.
I think the other thing too is historically, often when there are situations like this, state's projections turn out to be lower than in terms of the actual revenue that they get. So that's, I mean, I know what you're saying, but I've just seen that happen enough times to realize that they're thinking we're not in as bad a shape as other places. They're keeping track of the revenue, and they don't want, they don't want too excited about that. But that's what my thinking is, that it's probably a pretty realistic number. Could even be more.
Particularly with the legislature and the governors are all the same party, so
Yeah,
that usually works
yeah.
pretty well.
Yeah.
So the one-time bonus for SOQ funded positions, how much does the rest of it cost us?
well, a 2% bonus for all of our staff would cost $1.7 million, which we'll talk about in a couple more slides.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
The mandatory, yeah.
We've differentiated between the bonus and the pay increase in the slides later for your input.
Okay.
And the 2%, that is 2% of their total salary that becomes their bonus.
Depends how we roll it out. We're not sure. We haven't looked at the
Okay,
finer
okay.
details yet. But it
Well,
represents
the reason
500,000.
I said that, I know whenever we have a 1% raise, converts to that costs about $1 million. So
Right. So a bonus cost will
2%, Because that's what I'm looking at. I see correct me if I'm wrong, that's under the incentive programs at 2%?
Yes. It is, under the incentive programs. Now we'll take a look at mandatory operating expenditure increases. For WJCC, every 1% of salary increase costs the division approximately $1 million. The mid-year salary increase provided by the board effective January 1st is being funded in the current year by the unallocated or contingency funds that we built into the fiscal year 21 budget. But in order to fund the increase for an entire year, we will need to add $550,000 to our budget. The governor's introduced budget provides a 2% bonus payment with an effective date of September 1st, 2021 for funded SOQ instructional and support positions. Any actions taken in the current fiscal year would not qualify divisions to receive this funding in fiscal year 22. A 2% one-time bonus would cost approximately $1.7 million, and a 2% salary increase would cost approximately $2 million. As we look at salary increases, we'll want to consider our competitiveness for attracting and retaining staff. Mr. Baker presented information to you previously in December regarding our current rankings out of 9 regional school divisions. With the approved increase of 1.5% effective January 1st, our ranking is 5th out of 9 in bachelor's entry-level salary and 8th out of 9 in master's entry-level pay. If we do not provide more of a salary increase than other divisions, we will not move up in these rankings and will continue to struggle in competing with other local divisions for the strongest candidates.
Yeah, so basically the 2% lifts all ships, right? That's the tide that's going to make everybody come up equal. And so if we didn't come with a salary increase, then next year, if we increase salaries by 2%, the employee would see nothing. Because the 2% bonus money goes away, and then
Right.
it'd be nice if they would say you could get that 2%, you could get that money if you had 2% bonus or a salary increase.
I think there's options we'd like the board to maybe provide some input on. If we could go for the 2% salary increase, we could do some bonus and some salary increase. There's several ways to do it as long as we meet the stipulation that the governor has put in place to get the money.
The governor's introduced budget increases state funding in the SOQ for school counselors in fiscal year 22. Current staffing standards for school counselors are 455 to 1 for elementary, 370 to 1 for middle, and 325 to 1 for high school. The governor's introduced budget reduces the staffing ratio in fiscal year 22 to 325 to 1 across all levels. While we would not need to add any FTEs to meet the SOQ ratio of 325 to 1, which is a minimum standard, the National Association of School Counseling recommends the ratio of 250 to 1, and in order to meet the Virginia State Code of providing 80% of direct services to students, we would need to add 8 counselors to reach that ratio. We are planning to request the additional counselors over 2 years. Ms. Bourgeois will now join us to present information related to special education.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Herron. In order to provide context to the special education mandated needs, we will begin by looking at special education population trends. The numbers presented here are based on the December 1 state reporting document, which is used to determine state and federal funding for special education. The December 1 count for this year shows a very slight reduction of 16 students. It is important to note that even with that reduction, the overall percentage of enrolled students with a disability has increased from 15% to 18%. This chart provides trend data for special education staffing over the past 8 years. The addition of 1 teacher to the fiscal year 21 budget occurred as a temporary position during fiscal year 20 and was maintained to meet minimum SOQ requirements per state guidelines. Virginia regulations and the Virginia Standards of Quality establish the maximum caseload staffing requirements for special education services for school-aged children. Caseload standards per teacher or school average per teacher is a maximum of 20 points, except for classrooms serving students with autism, deafblindness, or multiple disabilities for more than 50% of the day, where the caseload maximum is 8 students. As this chart indicates, we currently have 12 individual teacher caseloads above the SOQ maximums and 6 caseloads at capacity.
Ms. Bourgeois?
Yes.
Can I go back to the last 2 slides to make sure so this school year, we lost 16 special education students, is that correct?
Correct.
And we lost 16 special education teachers?
No,
Okay.
that's a change in student count.
Okay, so we
It's the student-
gained 1 teacher.
We gained 1 teacher.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. Okay, thank you, I apologize.
These FTEs were originally presented as part of the fiscal year 21 proposed budget. In order to begin to address the classes which are over SOQ levels, as seen in the previous slide, it is recommended to restore these positions originally included in last year's proposed budget. In addition, contractually, increases for the Special Education Cost Center are due to an increase in the number of students attending separate private day schools. It is important to note that contract services can increase based on identified student needs.
Just one question there. So the teacher 2 FTEs, did we have those budgeted and then cut those?
They were part of the originally proposed budget. They never went through the final approval process.
Mr. Kelly, that brings up a good point. I think it's very helpful to compare the proposed budget for FY '22 next to the current adopted FY '21, but recognizing that there was a huge disruption, I would appreciate adding, just for this year, a 3rd column, which would include our fiscal year '21 request, then our actual budget, and then our request for this year, or your proposal, so that we can see, because if we're using this current adopted budget as a baseline, I don't think that's an appropriate baseline, and I don't think it accurately reflects where we want to be. I think our adopted request to the localities last year is a more accurate reflection of where we want to be. Am I making sense?
I think so. So last year, when all of this, when the world ended on March 13th, we had approved a budget and sent to the supervisors.
Correct.
Yes.
And then after that came back, we changed that. And so comparing the budget to what we originally proposed versus what was passed there was 2 different paradigms in the world at that point.
Right, and I don't think we ever want to lose sight of that original request.
Because that request had 30 positions that addressed equity issues, counselors, sped.
Right. And that request isn't going to be completely accurate anymore because our enrollment numbers are different, but there's elements of it that are relevant. So I think we should just keep it on our radar.
We can certainly bring together a slide towards the end when we start to bring all the pieces together to show the differences between in a summary format, which might be best rather than trying to do it throughout, which may get very confusing for everyone. But we'll certainly bring a comparison at the end to show where we were and where we hope to be.
Thank you.
I just had a question. So, Ms. Owensby, that we had 30 positions. Did we cut all 30 of those positions when the budget changed?
Almost all the positions were not funded, and
Right.
then we went into last year cutting more positions
Any more than the 30?
on
Okay.
top of the 30 that we'd originally asked for.
Okay.
And so when we talk about restoration of some pieces in tonight's presentation, those are the ones that were already funded the year before that we had to look at and took out of the budget in addition to the 30 we asked for.
I think that makes Ms. Cook's point even more relevant because we didn't replace attrition. So we kind of needed to be aware of this is where we wanted to be on March 12th, and then this is where we ended up on September 1st.
I think it would, yeah, I agree. And one of the things that I think would be really helpful if, pertaining to Ms. Cook's request is that, when you have that third column saying that put the word cut or something there so that not only, so that people understand that these positions were gone. Because, we talk about it here, but I wonder how many people watch the school board and understand that those positions did not happen.
I think it also gives us credibility as far as how we reacted to the pandemic and how we saved, to save expenses. in
And
the
I
fiscal
agree
year.
with that, too.
There are also several mandatory increases in contractual services not related to special education in the technology department. Mr. Landers is here now to share those with you.
Thank you. The additions within the instructional technology department are related to supporting remote teaching and learning, and several line items were moved from another cost center to capture all of instructional technology cost within one location. Zoom and MyVRSpot are both additional costs this year in direct response to COVID-19. Zoom naturally supports remote learning sessions, while MyVRSpot is an online storage tool used to store and link to instructional videos and recordings. Instructional resources noted are to directly support curriculum and instruction needs. Legends of Learning is a new program implemented in the spring of 2020 to directly support SOL-related virtual instruction. We are looking to increase its use across grades 5 and 8. Amplify is the other new program obtained this fall to support K through 2 reading. The other line items listed are not new, however, costs have increased to support additional licensing and content costs. Within technology, the software line is expected to increase approximately $28,000. Sign Now was added as a method to allow for no-contact electronic signing of documents between our school personnel and parents. Our network management tool increased slightly due to the additional devices for students and to support remote learning. Within contractual services, the majority of the increases were also due to the additional devices, primarily in our security lines, such as endpoint security and our anti-malware security subscription. Some other areas of increase are synergy, which included a cost for the integration of Zoom and Canvas synchronization, our email archiver that required additional storage space, and our division network firewall. We purchased the firewall in the spring of 2019, and the first initial maintenance fees were included with the purchase. However, now we have to pay the maintenance fee annually. Our wireless access point maintenance was also increased to support the external access points that have been installed on each of our schools. The computer refresh line is increasing due to the number of additional devices that we have purchased over the past several years. We do remain on a 4-year refresh cycle. In this coming year, we will focus on elementary and middle school teachers, middle school students, and elementary student tablets that were purchased just over 3 years ago and are coming due this summer. We currently have approximately 13,500 devices in our inventory, requiring the refresh of just under 3,400 devices each year. Wireless phone services have increased to support counselors and nurses with remote work and contacting of families. I will now hand the presentation back to Ms. Ewing.
Brian,
Yes.
go ahead, Julie.
So, thank you. So, this is for expenses starting in,
Yes, ma'am.
are we envisioning, in your mind, that Zoom, that we're going to be utilizing back face-to-face, hopefully? I'm being optimistic here, but I just was wondering whether some of these technology expenses are going to be different next year compared to this year, especially with things like Zoom.
And I'm sure they will be, and actually I've had the same conversation with myself as I've been going through some of this. Because it's hard to say. Now, I do not envision that we will ever go back from 1-to-1. So with that, some of these increases will definitely remain. However, there are some others that it may not be as much, such as Zoom, but I'm sure we would want to keep at least some to support homebound instruction, snow days, students with an illness for whatever reason, family vacation, may want to continue participating in their schoolwork even though they're not able to be in school. So I'm sure there will be some flexibility, but my crystal ball is about as foggy as anybody else's.
Yeah, I just think for the public to see a big expense for Zoom, they might be going where I'm going, which is like, oh my goodness, are we looking at this in September as well? So that, it's just more of a perception.
Thank you. So the other side of that question for me is if we don't find ourselves trending away from online learning, is there somewhere in here built where we're offering, I guess, more opportunities for mobile hotspots, the buses, the vehicles? Is that somewhere in this budget?
We did include some for the mobile hotspots. Now, those are currently funded by a grant, the Visions grant. And I wish I could tell you off the top of my head, I'm not sure if Ms. Ewing can or not, how long that Vision grant takes us. And I know it continues for a while, I just can't remember
The
exactly how
time period
long.
goes through September of 2022,
Yeah.
but based on the monthly cost and how much money we were awarded, I'm not sure how long we can sustain it, the cost in the grant.
Yeah, I know it definitely covers this year. We do envision maintaining a level of the hotspots even beyond that. And fortunately, we have been able to take advantage of a very, very competitive contract that was sponsored by Georgia Department of Education that drastically reduced our monthly costs for that.
Excellent. Thank you.
You always like the finance person counting the money, you know.
I just have a question.
Goes through September 22. Go ahead, Sam.
Mr. Landers, you mentioned snow days. I'm wondering if, with all of the technology, does this mean that on snow days that maybe this is a question for the superintendent, would this mean that we would go back to remote learning on snow days?
Potentially, we could continue with learning. I think there are some stipulations about the serving of food that would still have to take place to make those days count towards the 180.
Okay.
There's some stipulations behind the actual virtual instruction from memory.
Just a thought. Sorry.
Well, it'd also be tough for our staff to be prepared for a Zoom day versus an in-person day on the
Well,
flick
I
of a
wouldn't want to be
switch.
teaching then, I'll be honest. So, but I'd like them to relax.
Like a good sledding day when in the snow. So the computer refresh, you have 170,000 in here. Is that an additional to what we already have budgeted?
Yes, sir.
So what do we normally budget for computer refresh?
What is in this year's budget is 1.3 million.
Ooh,
This is 170 additional to the 1.3.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Kelly, the intent would be to build the budget over the next 4 years, so we're refreshing all those extra computers eventually and build that slowly over time. We've done that over several years now and built our capacity to sustain our technology over a 4-year cycle. And this enables us to start building in the capacity to do that with the additional computers we got this year.
I mean, the technology's here to stay, and as Mr. Landers points out, one-to-one is here to stay. Zoom is probably not as much as it is today, but it'll probably be more than it was on March 12th. And so, there's going to be some increase in those kind of software costs. So that would be expected. So I just want to make sure that we don't think $170,000 is going to refresh a third of our computers.
To that end, maybe it would be helpful, because these are numbers that are kind of, we're looking at them sort of in a vacuum, and it's very clear that these are the mandatory increases, but maybe somewhere in here we can say what the baseline is, right? You just, not for this year, but just maybe moving forward.
And one other comment on the counselors and nurses. Nurses did not have a school-dedicated telephone before the pandemic, but they became essential employees to have student access and parent access immediately when we went into the virtual world, and that will continue for the moment.
And building on that, it would be helpful to know if this is going from 0 to 18,000 versus, 1.7 million to 1.8 million or whatever, so just gives you context.
Right, because there are other people within the building. I assume the principal and the vice principal also have cell phones.
Yes, ma'am.
And so is this 18 to give them a second phone, or is this to reimburse them for a phone, or what would?
This is to give them a mobile phone. They did not have a mobile phone prior to the pandemic.
They didn't have a WJCC issued mobile phone prior to the pandemic.
Correct.
If they want to carry two phones, or if you give them $50 a month, if that's better. But then you have firewall issues, et cetera.
Maybe HIPAA, right, if it's.
Currently, at this point in the budget process, we are estimating a 5% increase in our workers' compensation, general liability, fleet and property insurances based on the average increase over the last 3 years, which amounts to $37,540. For our audit contract with Brown Edwards and risk management services provided by James City County, we are estimating a total increase of $7,700. Our radio maintenance agreement covers the maintenance of all of our emergency radios division-wide, including the bus radios. The increase for that agreement amounts to $8,600. We have seen an increase in our unemployment insurance costs since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic and will need to increase our budget to account for these costs. As a fully reimbursable employer, we pay 100% of the cost of unemployment for our employees. CARES funding is currently being utilized by the state to offset 50% of our unemployment costs, and we do not know when that funding will expire. We are estimating a cost of $500,000 based on our most recent quarterly invoice. During the pandemic, we have furloughed approximately 25 employees, but employees may have multiple jobs or may have filed for unemployment due to a decrease in hours, as is the case for bus drivers that typically have extra runs. Because we are their employer of record, we must pay those costs or a percentage of those costs if someone has multiple employers. As part of balancing the current year budget last June, several areas had reductions in funding that should be considered for restoration in fiscal year '22. Professional development and conference travel was reduced by $350,000. We are considering restoring $250,000 of this amount. Knowing that we would not be able to offer elementary and middle summer school last summer as the COVID-19 pandemic had just begun, those funds were removed from our budget. We will need to add this funding back in order to provide remediation programs to students this coming summer. Textbook funding was also reduced in the current year budget and will need to be restored in the amount of $100,000. The tuition assistance program was suspended for the current fiscal year, which amounts to $75,000. As part of our smoothing bus replacement plan, we should be replacing 10 buses per year and had built into our operating budget $220,000 or 2 bus replacements. Due to the pandemic, we have fallen behind in our replacement cycle. In order to get back on track, we would need to purchase a total of 10 buses by the end of the current fiscal year. We must consider having at least 4 bus replacements included in our operating budget, and at the current cost, it is estimated to be $452,000. Transportation costs of $90,000 for field trips was also eliminated from our operating budget and would need to be considered for restoration if field trips will resume next year.
Doing?
Yes.
About field trips, I understand that this is the restoration of funding from the last budget. Is there going to be a discussion moving forward about anything additional around summer school? I don't want to get ahead of you, but are you just looking to restore?
This is just restoration tonight, but next budget workshop will be bringing additional needs from departments, from schools. There's our usual process. We don't normally have a restoration piece in our budget, but this is just outlining, reminding the board and for the public as well to realize what we lost last year compared to the year before. before ever asking for a penny.
Thank you. I just read an article, I think today or yesterday, about some school divisions who are standing up some more robust summer programs. So that's what the genesis of my question.
Absolutely.
I have a question about the buses, namely, buses really, I think when I think of replacement, I'm thinking of mileage, I'm thinking mileage, and so this has been one of those strange years where our buses have been adding a lot of increased mileage. So is there any recognition of that? The fact that kind of put the stop on the mileage of a lot of our buses.
I don't have the information with me tonight, but I can certainly get it for you. We do have, I know, over 20 buses with over 250,000 miles on them still. And in fact, some of those are over 300,000 miles. So I do have a chart that shows the number that are over 15 years old and the mileage at those extensive mileage.
Just didn't know whether, when we're in a replacement cycle, a lot of time, you would think this year, you've got a whole lot of mileage that hasn't happened.
And this year, we didn't replace any, we didn't
Yep.
ask for any in
So then
end-of-year
that's-
spending. We were very conservative in going to our localities with our ask at the end of the year. Normally, we ask for buses in that, and we didn't this year. And that was really because of our very unusual situation in the middle of a pandemic. So we'll update the information, and you'll get a sense of how this year has impacted that compared to other years as well.
I think that's a good point about the fact that we scrapped all the new buses this past year, and so that's a good point, because, all right, thanks.
And to Mrs. Cook's point about the summer school, I would almost envision that our summer schools that are going to look a lot like a regular school day is a lot more like a regular school day than they have in the past. And so it's, as we try to recover from, since we're putting field trips back in, I'm assuming that we're going to be back in classes and we have to catch up a lot of kids on some issues. So we need to put a lot of thought into what our summer school is going to look like and how we really want to budget that.
There were also positions that were eliminated as part of the budget process that need to be considered for restoration. Bus driver FTEs were reduced by 10 in the current year budget, and we are considering adding 6 of those FTEs back in fiscal year '22 in order to support bus routes. Elementary teacher assistants were reduced by 7, but with the reduction in current enrollment, we only need to consider adding back 2 FTEs to maintain the 75-to-1 ratio that we previously staffed at, and that will still maintain James River's ratio at 70-to-1. Human Resources and Finance each lost 1 clerical position, and we are considering adding 1 of those positions back next year. Moving on to healthcare, Mr. Baker is joining us via Zoom tonight. He is currently quarantining at home due to a COVID-19 exposure. Mr. Baker?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm going to try to attempt to share my screen. It says it's disabled, so I don't know if you need me to share my screen or if someone's going to move the slides forward. It doesn't say I'm able to share my screen. There we go. Are we able to see that?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Herron. Thank you for giving me this flexibility tonight to present information about estimated costs for healthcare increases. Tonight, we're using a conservative estimate of 5% as we prepare our health insurance renewal, and we hope to have the final numbers for you at the next budget workshop. Currently, here in this first column on the left, you can see the current cost. And currently, the division pays 79.3% of the cost, and the employees are paying 20.7% of the cost. Based on the guidance from the board for the last 2 years, we are planning on an increase to be absorbed by the employees. an estimated 5% increase would change the overall cost share to 75.5% for the school division and 24.5% for the employees. And that's shown here in the next column, and then the increase in the third column. As a reminder, not all employees participate in the healthcare program. Approximately 1,337 of our employees do participate. And that means the health insurance differs than a pay raise. If you give a pay raise, it impacts all employees and it assists in their retirement. The division offers several healthcare options for our staff. Here are the current cost shares for our most popular options. For our $500 deductible plan, on this plan over here on the left is our employee-only plan, and the employee is paying $44 a month, or about 6% of the cost. In the middle of the chart, employee plus spouse, the employee is paying $243 a month for the plan, or about 19% of the cost. And then the column on the right is employee plus family, and the employee is paying $311 a month, or about 17% of the cost. We also have a $250 deductible plan, and it is our most popular plan amongst the employee, and does not cost the school division any additional money because the employee is paying for the upgrade. On this plan, on the left-hand side, it shows the employee is paying $127 a month, or about 16% of the cost. And you see the cost for the school division stays constant at $653. It does not change with this different plan. The employee plus spouse in the middle, the employee is paying $398 a month, or about 28% of the cost. And we have 125 employees participating in this part of the plan. And then we have employee plus family, which is our most popular, and the employee is paying $536 a month, or about 25% of the cost. And we have 318 employees participating in this part of the plan. We also do have a high deductible health plan option. We currently only have about 24 employees participating in this option, with about 10 employees in the employee only, where they pay $33 a month. About only 4 employees participating, employee plus spouse paying $89 a month out of pocket. And we have about 10 employees participating in the family high deductible plan, about 10 employees paying, and they pay $157 a month. And we don't have many employees choosing this plan because for not much more money, they can get into the $500 deductible plan. We also want to compare healthcare costs along with salary are among the top considerations of potential employees during the hiring process. Therefore, it's essential that our insurance coverage and costs are competitive with the market. This slide compares health insurance costs in neighboring divisions. Please note that this is a little bit like comparing apples and oranges, since the insurance plans are not exactly the same. This is the information for our more expensive $250 deductible plan, and we've added dental and vision where information was available. On the left-hand side, on the first chart, our employees, for employee only, pay $127 out of pocket to cover themselves for employee only coverage, while our neighbors on average pay $118. And for employee plus spouse, our employees pay $398 out of pocket per month, and our neighbors, the employee pays an average of $466 a month. And then for employee plus family, our employees pay $536 a month, and our neighbors pay on average $586 per month. As I mentioned earlier, at this time we don't have the final numbers for our annual health insurance renewal. We're using a conservative estimate of 5% right now. We hope to have the final figures at the next budget workshop later this month. Assuming we now continue the budget presentation with a summary of revenue and expenditures.
Thank you very much, Tim, I appreciate it. I think it would be helpful again, and I see that you're not planning on sharing any of the, passing through all the increase, which I think is fine, but I don't know that that's what we intended to do forever. I think it was until we were more in line with other jurisdictions in terms of the amount of total compensation, right? So it'd be great to have that data to see where we are this year. So if you could share that with us, because at some point I think we're going to want to start sharing those costs again. But in my mind, it was a temporary strategy to just adjust the whole of the pie. Would everybody agree with that? Am I making sense at all? You guys are looking at me like I'm crazy.
We look at you that way most of the time.
I know
But,
I am,
I would just like to say at the moment right now, I probably should have done this earlier, that as a member of the school board of Williamsburg, James City County, I acknowledge that I may have an interest in the fiscal year 21-22 school budget because my wife might be an employee of the WJCC schools. However, I believe that I'm able to participate in the consideration of and vote on the budget fairly and in the public interest. And I do agree with you that not passing along the costs, I think, was a one-time thing last year.
Well, we did it 2 years in a row, and I think doing it for a while until we've gotten more in line with our neighbors is fine, but, because how long that takes depends on the amount of the increase. But let me also say that I'm an employee of the Williamsburg Health Foundation, and as such, I may have a conflict of interest, but I don't have my statement in front of me, I'm sorry, but I can discuss and deliberate and vote on the budget and fairly and in the public interest. Is that close enough? Yeah,
It's close
thank you.
enough. We get it.
Ms. Robinson will have to get that language to you. But anyway, yeah, so I think it was designed to be not forever and ever, amen, until we were adjusted a little bit more in line with because we were paying as a percentage of the whole, a higher percentage in benefits than our neighbors. And so I would like to see that, to see where we compare and if we still need to employ that strategy or not.
Yeah, and I think it's also instructive, the insurance coupled with salary and that's all part of the employment package. And so while we may not pay as well as some of the other neighbors of our insurance package is a little bit better, then that's just something to consider as far as how we're compensating. Also, the other thing to look at too is if we look at who our average employee hire is, which is not necessarily the first years. We kind of seem to get teachers as they're starting a family and looking for a place to come out of the cities. I think it's instructive to look at that compensation package because we pay our more experienced teachers a little bit better than we pay our less experienced teachers. And family insurance kicks in with that too. So it's all very complicated equation that's hard for anybody to put on a slide to.
Right, and to your point that these products you're showing us on the comparison chart are apples to oranges, are we the only one who currently uses local choice? Is that what it's called? Is that who we use? Local choice?
Yeah, we're in the consortium of the local choice.
Are we?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I believe we're the only one.
Yeah, and and I support that. It's a better product. It's just which I support.
Isn't Hampton self-insured or?
I believe they are. Yeah.
I have a question, Tim. It seems like we've got lots and lots of choices for our employees. And some, we only have, like you said, 10 people doing one plan and 10 people doing another, 15. Does it cost the school system any extra money to provide that much of a choice of plans? Would it be more efficient to have? Well, I just am wondering, are we paying administrative fees or whatever? Has there been any kind of an evaluation of maybe looking at some of the plans that aren't well subscribed and seeing if there's any way to save money by saying, okay, instead of 6 different options, we've got 3 different options for you?
We can look into that. A few years ago, we used to have a $100 deductible and a $250 deductible, and we did make the switch to just the $250 and the $500. So we can look to see, I don't believe there's any additional cost by offering the high deductible health plan, but we can look into that and find out.
I just was curious.
Yeah, returning back to the idea of health cost, how much we put in as a portion or how much we funded, I'd like to have that discussion. Again, I think we need to have that discussion because I was under the idea that this was going to be a more permanent kind of arrangement so that there'd be more shared health costs. So I would like to have that discussion again.
Thank you, Ms. Young.
We can certainly bring back more information at the next meeting. And thank you for your input on the discussion to give us a sense of what you need to discussion along. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Baker? Thank you, Mr. Baker, for joining us via Zoom this evening.
My pleasure.
Hope your family's well.
Summarize what we've discussed this afternoon. Our preliminary state revenue increase as compared to our fiscal year 21 adopted budget and based on the governor's introduced budget is $5,078,300. As we look at a summary of the expenditures that we've gone through this afternoon, the cost to fund the remainder of the 1.5% increase provided effective January 1st is $550,000. The cost of a 2% bonus as presented in the governor's budget is $1.7 million, or a 2% salary increase is approximately $2 million. Essential increases in FTEs for school counselors for $320,000. And mandatory FTEs for special education teachers for $160,000. Contractual services increases amount to approximately $565,000 and includes added instructional resources to support a digital learning environment, as well as technology increases to support the additional devices that have been added in the current year. The estimated increase in workers' compensation, general liability, fleet and property insurance will cost $37,540, and the estimated increase in unemployment insurance is $500,000. The restoration of funding and positions amounts to approximately $1.4 million. These preliminary major expenditure increases amount to either $5.2 million or $5.5 million, depending on compensation increases, and the preliminary state revenue increase totals $5,078,300. So with only those expenditure increases discussed this afternoon, we're looking at a shortfall of between approximately $131,000 to $431,000. And just as a reminder, this revenue only includes the anticipated increase in state revenue based on the governor's introduced budget and does not include any increase from the localities.
Are you going to talk about what the localities budgeted?
I can talk about that at our next meeting.
Okay,
That's all right?
that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
And does it include the 15% reduction in sales tax?
It does include a 15% reduction in the estimated state sales tax.
That doesn't come to less than that, then better place.
Again, this is a preliminary look at our state revenue based on the governor's introduced budget. This information will change in the coming weeks as the General Assembly convenes and takes action. We have also only reviewed major expenditure increases this afternoon. There are other cost increases and potential savings that will be reviewed at the January 19th budget work session. Mr. Walker is now going to join us to review some elementary staffing considerations.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Herron. Elementary staffing is based on student enrollment, adherence to the Virginia SOQs, and using these ratios, target class size and maximum class size caps. Grades K through 2, a targeted class size ratio of 20:1 with a cap of 23:1. Grade 3, a targeted class size ratio of 23:1 with a cap of 25. And grades 4 to 5, a targeted class size ratio of 25:1 with a cap of 28:1. In reality, elementary staffing is actually based upon the class caps and not our targets. Therefore, we are proposing a staffing model seen through an equity lens based on need, which is derived from the economically disadvantaged percentages known as the free and reduced percentages of schools.
Mr. Walker, before you move on to that, for that chart, can you give us a sense of where this aligns with SOQs, which we know are insufficient and not okay, and we have to do better, but not today, but at some point, can you provide that to us so we just have that as a comparison?
Actually, I have it right now if you'd like it.
That would be great.
Okay. The Virginia SOQ staffing ratios for grades K through 3 suggest a 24:1 staffing ratio with a cap of 29 students in kindergarten and a cap of 30 students in grades 1 through 3. Grades 4 and 5, the Virginia SOQs suggest a 25:1 with caps of 35 students per classroom.
Thank you.
Excuse me for laughing.
I don't think we would have any teachers if we were at the SOQ levels.
We are proposing to take into consideration a school's free and reduced lunch percentage to establish the student-to-teacher ratio class size at each school. For schools with a free and reduced lunch percentage between 0 up through 40%, we are proposing to maintain our current staffing ratios. For example, the target for grades K through 2 would be a class size of 20 students to 1 teacher, but we would allow those elementary schools to go up to a cap of 23:1 for those particular grade levels. For schools with a free and reduced lunch percentage between 40 up to 65%, we are proposing to staff those schools at our current WJCC targets and not pushing class sizes up to our current caps. For schools with a free and reduced lunch percentage over 65%, we are proposing to staff all grade levels at a ratio of 19:1, allowing for smaller class sizes for more individualized instruction.
You have enough classrooms?
Yes, sir. Well, we'll get to that point here in just a moment.
Okay.
Well,
And to your point about the SOQs, going back to that real quickly, I think it's important to note that we are above recommended SOQ, but not up to the cap. So we're not. I would say we are not where we want to be in our elementaries that we're into that yellow zone. I think that needs to be kind of illustrated for folks to see. But
Yeah, I would love to communicate ideal, because I think Mr. Kelly's right. On the onset of the recession, we increased class size to save money, and we never got back. And so I think we need to remind people where we were and where we really need to be. So
this will be a significant move in the right direction by not taking anything away from any school, but to start to impose the actual targets rather than the caps for those schools that have a greater free and reduced lunch population. It's a way to do it with taking nothing away from those who have it now, but beginning to create an environment when we can meet the needs of students more individually who have more needs. And it's look forward to your input and perspective of how we're approaching this before we start. We're starting to look at it at secondary as well, but we haven't got it finalized yet. If this is the kind of approach you think is an appropriate one for us as a school division, then we certainly want your input this evening.
as I said, I'm worried about classrooms.
We'll
Start reducing ratios.
We're going to give you an actual number in a moment or two because this isn't a word we're moving towards, obviously.
Ms. Young?
Okay, I like where this is headed, so I will say that up front. My concern is about grade 3. I mean, 23 to 1, having been there as a teacher, you have students that come in, and anyone that's taught knows that you're going to have kids that are still, hopefully not, but you do get kids that are on the lowest possible level of reading, going up to a really high level, and those teachers are encountering a lot of difficulties. You typically end up spending a lot more time with the students that need greater instruction, which is okay. But I mean, at some point, if we can keep the cap, or not the cap, but the suggested class size at 23 I'd really like us to look at putting that in the same category as K through 2, where the cap would not be above 20. I mean, not where the suggested class size wouldn't be above 20, because that's so important to have those kids, by the time they leave 3rd grade, they need to be reading. And I know that's a minor thing maybe, but to me it's the most major thing that happens in elementary school, is getting kids reading and doing basic math.
And I think one of our challenges with that, Ms. Young, is that if we were to introduce the appropriate class sizes right now, we don't have enough classrooms.
Right, and I
to put-
recognize
to put
that,
them
and that's
in.
going back to what Mr. Kelly was talking about, but maybe in the future.
I think we're kind of trying to build a plan to get there, and this is certainly the first step in a potential plan on that journey. But thank you, absolutely, couldn't agree more about grade 3 and reading.
No, yeah, I think looking at this as a start, but with the idea that this is just a beginning, because I don't see a significant difference between 20 to 1 and 19 to 1, for example. I want to see in fact, I think that 40 to 65, it's like, try to tell me how the kids that are in the 40% range are that significantly different than the ones that they're still the same kids. So I'm, you know, I think it really is true if we really believe that we're going to take some steps to really raise up the academic abilities and performances of these kids. We are going to have to make some significant change. Can't be this. And Ms. Cook, 23 to 1, 25 to 1, small group. You know, when somebody says, well, yeah, it's 21, that means there'll be more opportunities for individualized instruction. Sorry. I've been in enough classrooms. Individualized instruction is really hard because if you're dealing with with one child, you got 22 other kids in that classroom, and I've heard this for decades, that individualized instruction that's where we got to go, and I don't see very much of it because it's really hard. It's really hard to maintain the rest of the classroom and having them engaged in meaningful instruction or practice, whatever you. I really think that start.
Dr. Beers, I know you've
We've been
quoted.
doing, you know, it's like we've been doing a start for quite a while now.
Right, sure.
And it's like, you know, I don't want to say, or get off the pot, but it's like, and I think it's going to be even harder, more of a challenge this year.
Dr. Beers, you've quoted often that it's 15 and beneath is where the research says the 15 to 1
I know,
ratio
I've told
is
you
actually
that.
what the
I
research.
wasn't going to bring that up.
Where you start to make a difference, ironically.
But we're going, but that's what I mean. It's by golly, it's a start. And otherwise, it's going to be the same old. And it's like, if we really believe this, to really help those kids, and we've got to, we got to break some paradigms, and we're just going to.
I couldn't agree.
The other thing I don't know is the 40 to 65%, do they have more teacher aides than the 0 to 40%? Is it true or is it the
We've
same,
changed
or-
the ratio very slightly for teacher aides. The only school that has a different ratio for teacher aides right now is James River. The others have a similar ratio. Ironically, teachers, when the students are in an A and B days, they actually have under 15 students in most classrooms at the elementary level. And so therefore the level of instruction and the focus on individual students has been terrific for the 2 days that they're there, but then they can't be there all 4 days because we don't have the space and the teachers to do it. But teachers have actually got to experience what it's like to have a class of 15 or under, and there's been lots of comments about how well that's working with regard to focus of students, individual attention, classroom management, and every other thing you can possibly imagine. And so we're seeing that it works so well, but we have a long journey in funding to get teachers' ratios to that level and buildings and classrooms to put them in.
Well, I think, maybe, I mean, for me, it's really frustrating because my entire career focused on exactly these kids. And over the years, whether it's Newport News, Norfolk, Gloucester, not so much, I didn't do as much here in Williamsburg for that. It's hard, and it is a challenge, and it gets frustrating for teachers. I know what that's. I just want to do everything we can. Just give them a lift. Can't do it by themselves.
I agree with everything you're saying, but I also appreciate that we're starting to talk about clicking the dial back down instead of clicking it up.
Right.
We've been clicking it up for too long, and
Right.
we need to start looking at coming back and moving it back down and having a discussion about going from 23 to 20 and not from 5. And so I appreciate that proposal, that part of the proposal.
And it's so critical at the elementary level. Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Beers. Ms.
I'm-
Cook?
I'm off.
I agree with Dr. Beers and Mr. Kelly. I think this is absolutely in the right direction, and Mrs. Young said so as well. I am a little concerned, so I think it's in the right direction. I support it, absolutely. I'm a little concerned about the bands. If I'm in a school with 63% free and reduced lunch and I'm in 4th grade, I've got 25 kids in my class, but if I'm at 66% free and reduced lunch, I've got 19. So that seems a little stark to me, and I hope over time we can work on those bands a little bit. And in the meantime, I hope that we do change the ratios for teachers' assistants, because whether it's because we don't have classrooms or because one school's at 63% and another's at 67%, kids are kids. And so if we can't separate into another class, if we can add another adult body in that classroom to help with education, I would favor also putting those resources in as well. And even though you all know how much I dislike learning cottages, if it means that we have to put learning cottages in every elementary school that has, free and reduced lunch over 40% to make room for this, then I think we need to do it until bricks and mortar are available to us. So as much as I don't like that idea, I think this is more important, and I appreciate your giving it such thought.
Learning cottage with. What would be interesting to see would be like what our actual schools look like, percentages in each of our schools. So I don't know that we want to draw, a school at 64 versus 66. That maybe we can differentiate that a little bit if we're, those numbers. So just looking at what those ratios would be helpful.
And I'm actually thinking you could be a little more specific than looking at the free and reduced lunch for the school, and look at the free and reduced lunch per grade level per school. Because it could be aligned very, very evenly, or you could have a 3rd grade class that's, for whatever reason, is at a really high level, but maybe the school is, I don't know. I just think if it's not too difficult to actually look at the grade level when making those determinations.
Sure, and I think we've put this out as an approach to get a sense of your leaning towards going with us there as a school board. The bands right now were based on some of looking at our current reality. Obviously, that changes over time. We may want to consider different bands going into this even now to lead us towards the future, but certainly this gives us a starting point in terms of differentiating our resources towards the needs of our students.
And I think from my perspective, I think these are guidelines and not necessarily stark numbers. And if you've, to Julie's point, that if you've got a grade level at a school that's got 52% free and reduced, but they have a need in second grade, then we should address that need and go there. So I don't want to look at this as criteria, but more as guidelines.
Thank you both.
Mr. Kelly,
Very
Ms.
helpful.
Young?
Yes, which brings up another point. When we're looking at this attempt to get this lower, what about in these classrooms? I'm assuming that we still have a large number of special education students and ELL students that are also in these classrooms. They're mainstreamed. Are our SPED students, are they weighted according to disability?
Yes, the teachers are allocated to students according to the matrix that Ms. Bourgeois talked about earlier. So that staffing comes on top of these basic ratios for classroom teacher ratio. And even our L students, those are additional teachers that are then distributed based on the number of L students in each school. And so those come in addition to your basic classroom to teacher ratio. And this will be the first time we've actually said we want to consider free and reduced lunch as a factor in distributing those resources, as well as Ls, as well as special ed.
One of the things you also talked about, Dr. Heron, was having additional teacher aides, but we don't have the space for going down to where we would like to be. But another alternative is maybe to consider is for each of those classrooms, especially the ones that we are concerned about, is having 2 certified teachers in that classroom. It would be costly, but it's cheaper than building a building.
That's true, and the research would suggest that while teacher aides play an incredibly important role in the classroom, it does not substitute for a teacher, and your resources are much better spent on employing additional teachers.
Absolutely.
I'm down with that.
I'm with that too. The one thing though is years ago, we used to have a teacher's aide in every elementary school, and then that was one of the first budget cuts we made back in the Great Recession. So
Every classroom, right?
was every elementary
In K3?
classroom through third grade? I don't think
It was
every classroom in every
kindergarten
elementary.
classroom, and
And
then
then-
1 per grade level.
Now that's where we are now.
Oh,
But that's not where we used to be.
It used to be K3, and then 4th and 5th had a floater. Isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And there's some
exactly.
discretion at the school level for the distribution of aides as resources as well.
It might have been one for 2 classrooms or something. Had more teacher aides, and while they don't substitute, they're better than nothing.
Right.
Not as good as a teacher. But I want to say that I don't appreciate our teachers' aides. I love our teachers' aides. They're great.
So, Mr. Walker, just to take us through an example here, it's maybe a bit late in the
Thank you for
game,
your
a bit late in the
patience.
game now, but just this is how it would work as a process.
We just took an example. Norwich Elementary right now has an overall free and reduced percentage of 51.4%. Proposing to maintain their class sizes at our established target ratios. For grade 4, that's 25 students to 1. So if we take the 4th grade enrollment currently for Norwich of 84 students, divide by our core class size of 25, we would have 3 teachers allocated for 4th grade. If we then compare the enrollment of the 84 students to the staffing of 3 teachers, the actual class size ratio for grade 4 would be 28 students to 1 teacher. This is above our target ratio. So therefore, we would allocate one additional teacher for fourth grade. This would then lower the class size, bringing the grade 4 ratio down to 21 students to one teacher. This is one example, one school, one grade level
Beautiful thing.
with this proposal. This chart summarizes the number of elementary core staffing allocations. And again, a reminder, we're talking about just grades K to 5 teachers. For the fiscal year 21 on the left, fiscal year 22 allocations reveals a needs-based model that's anchored by our target ratios and an equity lens focused on school need. And this is just our first steps in moving.
So the reason these numbers are not dramatically different is because of our reduction in enrollment. And so we're in a position to change our lens right now because we have a reduction in enrollment and we still have the teachers. And in the governor's budget, we have the no-loss funding that allows us to do this. This will become a greater challenge as we move into next year and the year after to sustain this over time, because that no-loss funding won't be there. And so there's
If our enrollment doesn't rebound.
Correct. And even if we rebound, we may have to not hit our ratios that we're trying to do in that rebound. So it's a very fluid situation, and we may not strike gold in the first year, but I think we have to create a way to get there and where we want to be.
Funny, but you'll get the kid.
And then this is sort of etched in Play-Doh, right? Because if more students show up at one of these schools, this changes. So in other words, this is just illustrative, correct?
This is where we would like to be as a first step.
And Mr. Kelly, you had asked earlier about space. Based on this proposal, our preliminary analysis would reveal the need for 2 additional learning cottages,
At which schools?
one at James River and one at Norge.
And what is,
Accommodate that.
if you don't mind my asking, principal feedback? Has this, if you could give us a sense of,
Lower class size would be greatly appreciated.
Mr. Baker?
So based on this model, and if the desire of the board is for us to take go on this pathway, then you will expect to see two trailers in our next budget conversation.
I wanted to ask Mr. Baker a question, but he's not here. But, I mean, I'm looking at funding. If we are able to, right now, this is based on our current staffing, correct? What the teachers that we have currently on board because of our reduced enrollment overall. But if we wanted to maintain this, that means hiring more teachers, doesn't it? I mean, if next year we rebound,
If we rebound, we would need more teachers to keep this model.
and we're already experienced, and that's why I wanted to ask Mr. Baker, because he has a handle on the number of teachers that applied. I can't ask him, so I'm spinning my wheels
We're
here.
having a reduced number of applicants every year. The number of new teachers coming out are becoming less. Over the last 2 years, we've had 2/3 experienced teachers coming in as our new teachers into the system, and only 1/3 of brand-new teachers. So it is becoming increasingly difficult to employ highly qualified teachers into any school division across Virginia and across the nation. And so we've got to keep that in our sights when we talk about compensation and other pieces of the budget as well.
If I'm looking at this table correctly, we're not changing our staffing level, we're just rearranging? Go from 232 to 231?
That's correct, sir. Because of the no-loss funding provided in the governor's budget, we're able to do this loss of enrollment.
That's the funding side, but the actual money, actual people there, we don't need any more people.
Not at the elementary level,
Not right now.
not right now. Yes, sir.
Like the asterisk.
Correct.
Dr. Herron, I have a question. So early on in the pandemic, when we talked about standing up our virtual academy, there was some conversation that might exist in some form or fashion going forward. So would that impact this?
It could impact at the elementary level. We're actually looking at an option that has been stood up by the Virginia Department of Education that would serve elementary students should they want to be involved in a virtual academy that would be affiliated with the school division, and we would get the 80. There's a lot of work going on in the background to offer that option, which wouldn't directly impact this, but it would impact a portion of the ADM association rather than losing all of the ADM. That's still very much in the works in the background, and we're trying to look at what that will look like and if it's something we might consider having as an elementary option rather than have a standalone academy at the elementary level.
I really appreciate.
I think we all do. I think we have consensus there.
Do we know at the moment how many elementary school students are part of the year-long virtual academy?
Roughly 1,200 students in the
1,200,
elementary
right.
virtual academy.
If there are no other questions, Mr. Walker, was that the end of your
No,
presentation? I'm
thank
going
you.
to hand back to Ms. Ewing for last steps today. Next steps.
Sure. Here you will see the timeline and important dates in our budget process. January 19th will be the next budget work session, as well as a public comment session prior to the regular board meeting. The superintendent's proposed budget will be presented on February 16th. There will be a joint budget work session with our funding partners at a date to be determined in March. A public hearing on March 2nd, and then the budget will be presented for your approval on March 16th.
Thank you very much for your input on the budget this afternoon. We look forward to bringing you more information in 2 weeks' time.
So just a summary for me. So we talked in your last slide here, not your last slide, but in the slide where you have state revenue and expenditure summary. We talk about preliminary and mandated. We talk about essential increase in expenditures. We don't talk anything about augmentation or improvements or anything that's quote unquote non-essential but necessary. Like for instance, summer school and what we need to do and some of the things that we need to do to recover. And so there's nothing in here talking about additional programs and that type of thing. And so
No, sir, that all comes in the second meeting. We're starting, this is the very basic level, and then we start to build on our real budget of need to move to the next level, which is remediation, it's behavior specialists, it's very specific positions in different areas focused on students. And so we'll bring that at the next meeting.
I just want to make sure that that's part of the plan.
Thank you, sir.
Before we wrap up, I have just one more question. Early on in the presentation, you talked about budgeting for current year's enrollment, which I think is sound judgment, and I support it completely. But can you talk to us a little bit about what happens if that doesn't come to pass, if the numbers go up by more than 1% or down more than 1%? Can you just paint that picture for us? Because that's a cornerstone of building a budget, right, is that enrollment number. So if you could just paint a picture for what happens if it's significantly off, up, or down.
I think that piece of the budget is primarily related to state funding, and Ms. Ewing, that because it's state funding that drives the enrollment, ADM enrollment, that piece of the budget. It doesn't drive the rest of the budget. So it's a portion of it. Do you want to?
Right, so our state revenue is approximately $3,300 per student. So give or take 100 students. Math really well in my head. That's 330,000, give or take.
Don't say that
100
out loud.
students. I need my calculator, sorry. Sorry.
Okay, so 3,300. So we can do the math if, great.
I'm just not cool.
My phone is crazy. I'm sorry.
You can't like just,
I have. It doesn't like me.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? So with that, I will adjourn the budget work session.